Good morning and welcome to our webinar this month. My name is Charles Parker. I'm a project director with the Retail Coach, and I'm excitedly joined by Colleen Walton from Brand Acceleration. Good morning, Colleen.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. And for those first timers that don't know what the Retail Coach is or what we do, we are a national retail recruitment and development firm that works with communities across the country to help them attract new brands, whether it be restaurants or retailers or large scale developers, ultimately to get their plan across the finish line to drive economic development goals, whatever that may be on the retail sides of things. And through that, we get to rub shoulders and run across a lot of cool folks like Colleen in the brand acceleration, who works on our marketing side of things, working with communities.
Yep.
Colleen, want to kind of introduce kind of how you guys got started and where you're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a marketing strategist with Brand Acceleration. So Brand Acceleration is a full service ad agency that works exclusively in economic development marketing. So we do all of the things that a regular agency does, but we only do them for cities, counties, multi-county regions, and states to do their economic development marketing effort. So I am based in Tampa, Florida, which is why we had to reschedule this for today because I was getting hit by a hurricane last week. Um, but I'm based in Tampa, and my territory is the 17 states that make up the SEDC region. So basically, the American Southeast. And we go into communities, help them identify their assets when it comes to business attraction and talent and resident attraction. We help them formulate a marketing strategy, decide which tactics are right for them, and then execute those tactics.
Awesome. So I know today we're going to talk about how to accelerate your marketing strategy as a community, really across all fronts. Any type of economic development and as a community as a whole. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so there will be a follow-up email. You will get to refer back to anything Colleen and I discussed today. We do have a question box. We're going to try to save some time at the end of the hour for some Q&A. So if you have anything as we go along and talk about the topics that we're going to cover, feel free to type that in the chat box, the Q&A there on your screen. And then Katie Zuniga is on our team as well. She's in the background. You probably see her name popped up. She's here to make sure I don't mess anything up or press the wrong button or cancel this whole thing and answer questions. So she's on our team with the Retail Coach, working in the background as well. So really just to get things started, talking about a webinar and how things have changed. We've been doing webinars for a long time, but in the last 8 or 9 months, it's kind of been the only way of life. And, Zoom fatigue is certainly setting in as we all see. So we appreciate everyone on here to make time this morning, participate in another one. But it's really how our life has changed with COVID. And we talked about this leading up, Colleen, that, really don't really want to address it, but you have to at the same time because it is changing
Yeah.
our lives so much, with the lack of conferences, the lack of face-to-face opportunities. This is really the only way that folks can have that interaction with colleagues or meet new people
Yeah.
or networking, and you still need to have a plan to move forward.
Mhm.
Whether it be the conferences we're at or webinars now, on the marketing side of things, everyone's talking about these tactics you can have, the strategies that put in place generally for your marketing area. But there's a lot of material to cipher through and to figure out
Yeah.
what's the best for me as my community, as economic
Mhm.
developer. So I guess the best place I'm going to start is how do you kind of wade through that and pick which is the best tactic for me in my small community or me in my large community that's a bedroom community of a large city? How do you kind of filter through all that and find the best starting place to start marketing the opportunity in the community?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging because I think we've all sat in on presentations where a speaker, whether it's a marketing speaker or a site selector, says, here's 5 things you need to do and you'll be great. And as we've joked before, if I could do that, I would be making so much more money than I am right now.
Right.
But the problem is with marketing is it's so specific to every community. No two projects are the same. And even me who works exclusively in economic development, as there are similarities between some of my clients, they're not the same. And so the things I do for them can't be exactly the same. So really it is figuring out what you have to market, what you're trying to accomplish, and then picking the right method for that. And we're going to kind of go through a little bit of an activity for that. But I think it's important to keep in mind that you can market one product to two different audiences. So if you're trying to attract retail to your community and you have a broad swath of retail that you want, you can market what you have, but you have to phrase it a little bit differently. So like what you're going to use as your message to attract something like a Target is different than what you're going to use to attract maybe like an AutoZone or even like a Whole Foods or something, because they have different markets, different types of people that they cater to, different products that they have. So you have to really be specific with those objectives. So this activity, it's really high level, but it's something that you guys can all do with your team. You can just sit down and do this conversation. All you need is just a piece of paper. I'm going to kind of show you what it looks like. It's really not fancy and really not complicated. So you're just going to take a piece of paper, divide it into 4 columns like this. This first column here is going to be your objective. What is a goal that you are trying to accomplish? This needs to be really specific. So it can't just be, I'm trying to attract retail. It needs to be, I'm trying to attract this exact type of retail. Or if you're trying to attract talent, it can't just be, I want talent. How old are they? What fields are they working in? What are their interests? What is their quality of life? So really figuring out specifically what is a thing that I am trying to accomplish here. So then the second column here is going to be your audience. Who needs to hear the message to make a decision about this? So this is going to be site selectors. This is going to be residents. This is going to be business owners. It's going to be local entrepreneurs if that's a thing you're trying to attract. So really figuring out who that audience is, again, being really specific about it. So the third column here is going to be your assets. So what do you have in your community that makes that objective possible for you? So this can be infrastructure, this can be transportation, this can be traffic counts, this can be tourism, it can be a quality of life thing. What assets do you have that serve that objective? And then finally, this last column is your tactic. And I'm going to go through some examples of this, so this doesn't all make sense right now. So the final column is tactics. So that's the actual thing that you do, the actual marketing piece you develop, the actual strategy that you employ. So what you have to think of as you're filling this in is everything relates to the column before it. So what tactic do I use to market my assets to an audience that can help me accomplish this objective? So as you're filling it in, just kind of think backward as you go through the columns. So the first example I'm going to give is a business attraction example. So something we've heard a lot of this year is bringing our supply chain closer. I don't like that my supply chain or elements of my supply chain are in another state or in another country. So I want to bring them closer to me. So say you have a food processor and you're wanting to attract a blow molded plastics manufacturer because they make the packaging for that food. So your objective is going to be to attract a blow molded plastics manufacturer to support an existing business. So your audience for that is going to be any site location professional that specializes in plastics manufacturing. And there are a handful of those out there. So your assets are going to be the existing supply chain. I have employers here who can buy product from this company. It's going to be transportation assets. Rail is really big in plastics because you're bringing a lot of the plastic pellets up from the Gulf Coast. This is going to be any other access to raw materials, access to some utilities that are relevant, and then also workforce training and education programs that are going to support your plastics industry. So then your tactics for this may include adding a plastics page to the website where you talk about your assets. This can be an industry-specific emailer that highlights all of those assets. And it can also be a video if you want to go out and shoot a 2 to 3 minute video that talks about plastics in your community. So again, I'm going to send out an emailer that talks about my plastics assets to site location professionals with the goal of attracting a plastics manufacturer. So another example of this is going to be to attract talent. I have done with my example here specifically manufacturing talent generally aged 25 to 45. So if I go to my local employers and I say, you have a lot of open positions, who do you need to fill those? What is their education level? How old are they? Where are they located? And I've decided that that's my target audience. So that's the objective that I have, is attracting those people. So my audience is going to be that specific demographic. My assets here are going to be available jobs. That's why people move to communities, to take a job. And then it's also going to be my quality of life assets, because if they're moving, they're likely going to bring family with them, and they want to know that their family is going to be happy here, that they're going to enjoy living here. And then it's also going to be some continuing education. If you're wanting somebody to move for a job, they know there's going to be upward mobility for them. So maybe highlighting some continuing education programs that they can participate in to stay in the community and their job. So then your tactic for that is going to be more social media marketing. It may be a radio ad. And again, when we're talking about specificity, if I know I'm attracting manufacturing talent, which is typically male, and we're saying ages 25 to 45, my best options for radio is going to be probably sports and country. And I know it's a generalization, but it tends to be pretty accurate. I don't think marketing on NPR is going to get some of these people. So that's why we need to be specific about who the audience is, because it really helps us be specific with that tactic. So again, just kind of working backward, I'm going to run a social media campaign that markets my job availability and quality of life to this talent aged 25 to 45, so they can fill open positions in marketing or in manufacturing in my community. And this is kind of what I'm saying, where it's not a complicated process. It does just take some like sitting and really thinking about, like, who am I talking to? What are they looking for from me? And then how do I get that message to them? And I know I'm going to defer to you for the retail examples because you know more about it than I do. But I know you kind of had some examples for this as well.
Yeah, and my paper's not nearly as elegant as yours.
Oh, it's okay.
So it doesn't take a whole lot to plan this thing out.
No.
But it is, like I said, it's the same overall platform, whether you're going after, industrial manufacturing or even retail, they all follow the same principles. So we talk about attracting a new sit down restaurant. Your audience is going to be, the corporate site selectors, brokers and developers, the ones that ultimately are the key decision makers of, hey,
Mhm.
that's where we're going to drop our next location. Your assets that you have for, say, a sit down restaurant would obviously be real estate. Do you have a site that has, strong traffic? Is it good at access and visibility? Other assets you could have are residential growth. Do you have, a major residential community either planned or, coming out of the ground right now? Those are big aspects that retail like to see when making their decisions about their next location. And then also looking at complementary, restaurant sales. Are there other sit-down restaurants in town that you can pull comps from? These are things that, kind of counterintuitive for looking at competition, but there's a reason that Home Depot goes across the street from Lowe's and
Yep.
CVS goes across from Walgreens. That there is, a level of strength when you go in together, knowing, hey, if I'm going to get a prescription filled, I'm going to that particular intersection. I'm going to that area of town to get home goods because I know if Home Depot doesn't have it, Lowe's has it. So these are type of things that are assets that you can go in and recruit even a competitor at times to certain areas. But getting down to the tactics of, all right, how do I market this? So it's building a 1-page or a 2-page site flyer that basically has some data demographic information, the highlights of this site, and aerial of this site. Something that honestly, anyone with a computer and a few screenshots can do at a reasonable area. Was not a big marketing cost to kind of get
Mhm.
the ground level things going. Contacting their corporate site selectors is doing your research, making some phone calls, getting the right person who need to talk to. Sometimes it's identifying a potential franchisee. That's talking around town, figuring out who might be having interest in opening up a franchise store. And then lastly, attend retail trade shows, where we have some of those information, that 1-page flyer handy. So there are a lot of things you can do to kind of get yourself back to that ultimate goal of attracting a new sit down restaurant. And Colleen, we've already had a few questions come in talking about, our community doesn't have an official marketing strategy
Mhm.
and cost is an issue. But even an exercise like this, where you're setting your goals and getting it down to, hey, what are the first 3 action items we can do before we start spending money, is it's kind of an important step.
Yeah, and when you're making that list of tactics, keeping budget in mind is an important thing. It's like, would it be great if I could do a $200,000 talent attraction campaign? Yes. But I know that's not realistic for a lot of people. So when you are filling out that tactics, keeping in mind, what is a realistic thing for me? What is something that I can do with the money that I have? And so I gave an example of mine was social media. That's free. The brochure you're talking about, like the 1 or 2 page brochure, that's something that you can do either in-house for free or you can get it pretty inexpensively. So it's like there are a lot of tactics that you can employ that don't need to break the bank for you.
Exactly. And some are even, operationals that kind of
Mhm.
fall within the realm of municipality or a county. You talk about, site prep. If you're looking
Yeah.
to attract whether a sit down restaurant or, another example, talking about a new hotel. If you have a large parcel, is that a parcel is it already zoned that a hotel could come in and start day one? Looking at access, does it have one access point, or is there another way you can get a secondary access point where you can go and start making phone calls to your
Mhm.
DOT and start getting that changed around? At least have the wheels in motion, so when the developer ultimately comes in, the DOT is already expecting to change access there. So there are some things that you can start on the front end to start preparing that site, that A, make the project go faster, but B, make it more marketable, because the
Mhm.
developer comes in and sees that, oh, this community is already working on access for me. They've already zoned it for me. I don't have to go through those hurdles with the planning commission. That goes a long way to get that developer to choose your property over one, in an adjacent community, because they have less hurdles to overcome. And also, you've signaled that, hey, we're a business friendly community. We want to help you. So it helps you on multiple fronts. And
Mhm.
those are all things that you can do to market your community without spending really any money, really by making a few
Yeah.
phone calls and starting some conversations.
And then having that stuff on your website, adding that like information about those things to your website is something you can do for free. So making sure that you have information like a specific target industry page, making sure that if you are making improvements to infrastructure or to sites that you are talking about that on your website, that's something that takes 10 or 15 minutes to add to your website and is something you can do for free. And so it's like it doesn't all have to be really big, expensive, fancy marketing. Some of it can be really simple stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's just a key point, because there are so many communities, especially now, that have their budgets tightened
Yeah.
and are looking to start somewhere. And I know a
Mhm.
lot of communities are doing some things right now and trying to find out how to get the word out.
Yeah.
Once they do it, it's all right. Now that we've done this, we are business friendly. What's the next step?
Mhm.
How do people know we're business friendly?
Right.
And I know you'll say, you on marketing side, a lot of the works that you come is with that messaging of how do we, almost beat our chest a little bit.
Mhm.
Lately, one of the things that most communities are trying to do, that is, I think, really a key important and can be a major recruitment tool, especially on the retail side, is their reaction to COVID-19, and what are they
Right.
doing to help businesses? How are they, changing X, Y, or Z, or doing whatever they can to support, whether they're a
Mhm.
large city who maybe have budget and access to more funds, or even smaller communities, or just
Right.
being flexible. And we've kind of seen a wide range of communities doing a lot of things. Here in Dallas, I live right in an entertainment district, and they've opened up sidewalk patios to some of the smaller restaurants that only have 3 or 4 tables. They've
Mhm.
opened up ordinances to say, now you can set tables out on the patio, or even
Yeah.
take up a parallel parking spot if you build a fence and put up a
Yeah, we've
piece of
got a couple of those here in Tampa.
put up a plywood board and call it inside of your restaurant, and that way you have some outdoor seating, so you can still open up and be in business during these times. Other examples, a downtown in Georgia that we're working with, they made one of their corner lots in their downtown strictly for pickup spots. So for all the businesses downtown who had call-in orders or online orders, um, instead of having parking only for the day, it was strictly kind of like Chick-fil-A's, I'm in this stall, come bring me my retail bag, come bring me
Yeah.
my food, whatever it might be. Making it easier for those businesses to at least have a plan to share with their customers, say, hey, park in this lot, we'll bring it right out to you, call us when you get here. That way,
Right.
contactless. You can still shop with us and make it very easy. I think that was a really big step, kind of a cool way for the downtown communities to kind of we talk about talk what the national retailer is doing and bring it down to a local level to compete on the
Mhm.
same baseline. I think that was a great example of how communities are doing it. And then if you follow me on LinkedIn, last week I just shared a really cool article about a community in South Carolina that were streamlining their permitting process for food trucks, where it had been every time a food truck came to their neighborhood, they had to go through this middle process, had to get it approved. And they've switched that to basically a blanket approval. If you write a letter saying our neighborhood approves food trucks, it's kind of a one-time blanket food truck. So now they can kind of have that aspect. And food trucks have been kind of a cool stopgap during this time and have kind of been forced to adopt. I know they can be controversial in some communities, but they've been an area that kind of for test markets for brands, and also kind of ways to get people to feel comfortable and be in an area that, hey, this is an area that we can exist during quarantine periods, and also for the business side, hey, this is an area that we feel like we can make money, maybe we should consider opening up a full-time restaurant here. So I think there's a lot of cool things that communities are doing right
Mhm.
now, but it's getting the message out. How do they tell people and
Right.
share with other businesses to say, hey, look what we just did. We just helped our 14 downtown businesses make revenue during this time, during a lockdown. They've all succeeded
Mhm.
well. How do you take that reality and share it with the world to see, for other
Right.
businesses to see and say, hey, maybe I need to go check that community out. Maybe that's somewhere I need to be.
Mhm.
I think
And
that's
I think a lot of what I saw a lot of communities do, and I'm sure you've seen this, is they just put up a COVID page on their website. And I have put COVID pages on websites in what I do. And I think some people put that up because there's local pressure, excuse me, to do that. And they think that that's enough. And it's not. And we all know that it isn't. I think there's two issues with it. One, people aren't going to look at it if it's just like if a site selector is coming to your website and they're interested in your community, they're probably not going to read your COVID response page. So if you can spread that information out across the relevant pages. So think about the concerns that they're going to have. If I'm interested in bringing something to the community, I want to know that there's a talent pipeline, a workforce pipeline, and education is something that's being greatly affected right now. So on my workforce training and education page, I can put language about what my schools are doing to make sure that they're staying open or that they're continuing education for people, particularly with things that require being hands-on, like welding and industrial maintenance, talking on that education page. Because I know a site selector is going to look at my education page. So why not talk about it where I know they're going to be looking?
Yeah, that's
Um,
really interesting because I know I see a lot of those on community websites, and honestly, I click right through them. And like, sorry to everyone who spent a lot of time building
I
those, but
know.
if they're all in one spot, they're easy to click through and ignore because the gist of them are generally going to be the same thing about
Right.
public safety and those things. But if you
Mhm,
bake it into those websites, I think that's really interesting,
mhm.
to where it's natural. Like, hey, during this, we're also helping make sure we're maintaining safe on workforce employment and how we're actually doing it, how are we holding classes right now. I think that's
Yeah.
more authentic and shows that, hey, that's much more of a leadership role, and
Mhm.
this is a proactive community more than just one block, and then the rest of their website's the same.
Yeah, and if you have a page on your website that's talking about retail, or if you're sending out an emailer that's about retail, including the stuff in there, like what you were talking about, like here's what we're doing to support our retail and making sure it's staying open and making sure people feel safe. So putting that in a place where people are already going to be looking, not asking them to look at a new place for that.
It's very interesting, kind of behind the door marketing.
Yeah. Well, it's like we know what pages people look at on a website. It's sites and buildings, economic data, workforce training and education, and target industries. Those are the top most visited pages. So if I know people are already looking there, I should just put the information that they want there. And then if you're, like you said, sending out emailers, or if you are putting together a video or you're using social media, talking about those things that you're doing. You have to be careful to not do it in a self-congratulatory way. It's like, "Oh, look at me. Look how charitable I'm being."
Yeah,
It
how do
has
you
to
walk
be
that fine line?
yeah, it's like you wanna be to be more of, like, responsiveness. It's like we recognize this issue, we stepped up for our employers, we stepped up for our retailers, and we really helped them address a pain point of theirs. We helped them solve a problem that they were having. And it can't be just, oh, we felt bad, and so we decided to intervene and do something nice for them. One thing we did here in Tampa, and this is a specific example to us, our local, like our city website or our city Instagram, they already were promoting a lot of local businesses and talking about different places in different neighborhoods. Their whole thing is like living like a local, not living like a tourist. So what they did during really the height of the lockdowns was they were doing these Instagram takeovers where they were letting local businesses showcase themselves on this large platform. So they weren't coming in and saying, well, let us tell your story for you. They were saying, here, take our platform. You have a day, tell your own story, take ownership of what you're doing and what's happening to you, and share that with an audience that we already have. And so I think it really is like utilizing a platform that you have, utilizing systems that you already have in place, but kind of pivoting a little bit of what you're doing with them and showing how you're addressing a problem that people are having.
Yeah, so almost making it more about the businesses shows you're more about business. It
Right.
builds itself. We had a question pop up. You said like there are some top pages of websites that people like to go.
Mhm.
Can you repeat kind of what those top ones that people most likely or
Yeah.
go to first?
So the top pages, and this is something that we have asked site selectors and they have told us this, and then we also see it in the analytics of the websites that we build. So the top 4 pages are going to be sites and buildings. So this is going to be like the location one or like Zoom Prospector, the sites and buildings database that you can search through. The second page is going to be economic data. So this is demographic information, labor shed. And I will say, this is one of my biggest pet peeves. Your labor shed is not the labor force of your county. It's like a 50-mile driving radius around your county. It's going to be on that page is also going to be like educational attainment, what industries most of your talent works in, things like that. The third page is workforce training and education. So career and technical education in K-12 schools, and then continuing education in like your community and technical colleges, specific to your target industries. So I'm sure that your CTE program has a really great cosmetology or a dental hygienist program, but that isn't specific to this. So we're talking welding, industrial maintenance, some front office, if office is an industry that you're going after. So again, kind of tying back to the activity we were doing before, think about the industry you're trying to attract. What types of employees do they need? And then talking about the workforce training and education that will supply those employees. And then the fourth page/pages are your target industry pages. So a page for each of your specific target industries where you talk about assets that are relevant to those. So transportation, utilities, workforce training and education, anything else that you feel like is relevant to that. So yeah, those are going to be your 4 most visited pages.
Yeah,
It's not saying the other pages aren't important, but I just know if somebody's going to spend 5 minutes on a website, those are the pages they're going to look at.
yeah, those are ones you might either want to title that way or make sure you have on there. And I
Yeah.
think it's interesting pointing about how, you said employment shed and how that's,
Mhm.
50-mile radius or whatever it might be. It's all a little bit different,
Yeah.
especially true with retail and, all
Mhm.
the market analyses we do. We don't just do a single trade area for a community because you're not going after just one type of retail. A quick
Right.
serve restaurant has a different trade area than a grocery store. Grocery stores,
Oh, yeah.
public submission site, the first thing they ask for is 1, 3, and 5 miles. Altitude Trampoline
Mhm.
Park looks at 18-minute drive times. I mean, they're all a little bit different in what they look at. So it is important to kind of know your community. And, it's why we sub market communities. The
Mhm.
interstate markets can be different than the downtown market. So make sure you know kind of how your demographics stack up, because you might be a Whole Foods community in one part of town, but only
Yeah.
because you have access to an interstate, and that might makes a better site for a grocery store or a sit down restaurant rather than a different part of town, which might have higher incomes, but it's more residential. It's not quite the retail node that they need. So
Yeah.
it is very specific to what the overall trade area is, whether that's employment trade area, or the retail versus grocery versus sit down.
Mhm.
Having all that information ready, available, on a site, such as, a demographic site, an information site, puts you ahead of the game because it's all right there for them. And it shows that, hey, this is a community that gets it and something
Right.
to be.
And it's
So
kind of what we were talking about earlier when we are talking about defining a specific objective because it's going to change the the assets that you need to market. So we know people will drive for a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shop. They'll drive for that, but they're not going to drive for a Walmart or they're not going to drive for like a Target. They might drive one town, but they're not going to drive an hour. And so when you are talking about something like a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shop, you're saying, okay, my driving radius is going to be much bigger. Whereas like a Target might be the surrounding towns. And so it's the same thing with like a workforce. Like I know, particularly in rural communities, a lot of times people will drive up to an hour and a half for a job. Because we're talking about talent attraction, I know because my family's from a rural part of Illinois. I know I'm from the city in Florida, but my family's from rural Western Illinois. My grandma's town has 600 people in it. It's very small. My cousin will drive an hour to a job and an hour home every day before he'll move an hour away from his family. And so thinking about that, it's like, okay, if I'm in a rural place, I know my labor shed may be a little bit bigger because people are willing to drive farther for work. So yeah, I think as we're talking about the specificity of those objectives and then the specificity of the content you put on your website. So really figuring out what am I going after and then tailoring that information toward it.
yeah, I think it's just a really
Yeah.
important step. Like I say, trying to find steps that are cost friendly and kind of set some things
Mhm.
up. These are some things you can start on today
Yeah.
without spending money to organize your website and set that up. But I know
Oh
you've
yeah.
mentioned a lot about the platforms. You've
Mhm.
mentioned email a lot and social media a lot.
Mhm.
If say community wants to start boosting their social media presence, they want to start focusing on that being kind of a medium they want to focus on.
Yeah.
What are the best platforms for them to maybe start on? There's some they should focus on and some that maybe aren't as important in terms of priority of where to start.
Yeah. I think traditionally LinkedIn has been more business focused. So I think if you're trying to really market to site selectors or really any site location professional, I think LinkedIn is going to be your best route for that. Your content there is going to be, again, think about what your audience is looking for. And this is a thing I think that a lot of people have trouble with. It's you have to get out of the mindset of what do I want to tell them? And you need to be asking, what do they need from me? What do they want to hear from me? So site selectors are going to want to know, do you have available sites and buildings? What are your transportation assets? What are your workforce training assets? All the things that we've talked about. And people are going to get sick of me saying them, but that's what they're wanting to find out. And I think I see a lot of people focus a little too heavily on local things. And it's, oh, I'm going to share information about this ribbon cutting, or I'm going to share information about this loan program that we have. And while that stuff is important to what you do and important to your community, your primary audience for that needs to be site location professionals. So people outside of your community who are citing bigger projects than what you're marketing about. So on the flip side of that, if you are marketing to a local audience, I think things like Facebook and Instagram are going to make more sense. I also think if you're doing talent attraction, using social media is the best way to do that. When I moved, I lived in Orlando for a couple of years before I moved to Tampa. And when I was considering moving to Tampa and trying to decide the neighborhood I wanted to live in, I never went to the Convention and Visitors Bureau website. I never went to the chamber website. I went on Instagram and I looked up places in Tampa. I've got a whole folder still on my phone of places where I was like, oh, that coffee shop looks nice. I like that. And it's like, oh, there's a beach here that I want to go to. And I was kind of making a mental note of where all these places were. And then I picked my neighborhood based on where most of that stuff was. But I never once visited the city site or the county site. I did it entirely on social media. So doing Facebook and doing Instagram for talent attraction and retail attraction and retail support, I think makes more sense than maybe using a LinkedIn for that. But I think the real question everybody wants to ask is like, when should I post? What time of day should I post? And like the specifics of that. And there isn't really an answer to that. I think obviously you don't want to be posting things at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know nobody's online. But the real thing here is engagement. So you'll notice that if you go on Facebook, if you go on LinkedIn, you'll start to see the same people at the top a lot because all of these platforms reward people who engage with the algorithm. So the more often you post, the more often you comment, the more LinkedIn is going to like you and push your stuff toward the top. So commenting on things that people post, and I'm talking thoughtful comments, not just thanks for sharing or great article. Like that's not
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
You and I have talked a little bit in the past of
Mhm.
how do you engage? How do you
Yeah.
properly comment on a LinkedIn post? I mean, that sounds silly and rudimentary, but
Mhm.
it can go a long way with
Yeah.
remembering somebody or a soft introduction at times.
Yeah. So one thing we talk about a lot in marketing is called reach and frequency. So it's a media term, but reach is the number of people who see a message and frequency is how often. So one thing that really benefits a lot of people is frequency and repetition, staying in front of people that you may not have ever met. I've had people come up to me at conferences and I've never met them, never talked to them in my life. They're like, "Oh, I feel like I know you. I've read your articles that you've written for your blog." And it's like, I love all of your stuff. And it's like, great, have no idea who you are. And so, but if they had been engaging with that and staying in front of me when I did meet them face to face, I may have known who they were. So when you're commenting on something that somebody shares on LinkedIn, instead of just saying, "Hey, great article," you can comment on it and be like, "Hey, Charles, thanks for sharing this. In this article, you mentioned this. Can you tell me more about that? Or can you give me an example of how this works?" And then that gets you involved in a conversation. So then later on, if that person reaches out to you in an email or they call you, there's something in your brain that's like, "Oh, yeah, I remember this person." And it's just that stuff. And this is, again, something that you can do for free. It's not cold calling, it's not cold emailing, but just building up that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of brokers all the time, posting, hey, just open this new restaurant or looking for a pad site for this. Comments or say, hey, what are adjacent retailers you'd like to be by? Or, what's
Mhm.
your preferred traffic count? Now, there are some simple questions, from site criteria standpoint that can drive that conversation that can, make you have a conversation with that broker so they know your community, know what you're looking for. But also ultimately, when it is time to present your community, you kind of know some things you look for. You've heard it directly from them. Oh, they've got to have at least 18,000 cars per day on the front of this site. So when you do
Mhm.
ultimately reach out to them, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 18 months from now, say, hey, I've got this great site for some of the restaurants that you represent. I
Mhm.
remember you told me that you like to have at least 18,000 cars. We've got 21 here. Is it
Yeah.
worth consideration? So I think something like that is kind of leads that warm up
Mhm.
for that potential conversation. And it is a long game. We talk about all the
Yeah.
time how retailer recruitment is a process. It's not an event. It's something you're always building relationships on. And that was just something that we touched on before, and I had never really thought about how to properly use LinkedIn. No one really teaches you how to really use.
No, they don't. They tell you how to set it up, and that's about it. But there's this thing in marketing, and it sounds it's one of those things that like it sounds really cringy to say, but it's a realistic thing. It's called the parasocial interaction and the illusion of intimacy. And you'll also hear it referred to as parasocial relationships.
Those are some big words.
They are. So they're from psychology, but it's basically this idea of feeling like you know someone that you have never met. So when you think about somebody like a celebrity, it's like, oh, I follow, let's say, Chris Hemsworth on Instagram. I see pictures that he posts of him with his friends and him with his family and him doing these things. I feel like I know him from that. So then when he turns around and I see him in an ad, it's like, oh, I trust him because I know him, even though I've never met him and never talked to him in my life. That's kind of how this works. If you build up this sense that you know someone or someone knows you and you have a relationship, even if it's just through LinkedIn comments or Instagram comments, if they recognize your name, they recognize your face, and they feel like you understand them, then when you do come to try to sell them something, it's like, oh, I trust this person because I know them. Like I'm more likely to believe what they're saying because we're friends, even though you maybe talked to them like 4 times.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it is that like staying in front of somebody, getting to know them, referencing other things that they have said. So not just like you were talking about the traffic count and stuff like that. Like referencing something that they have taught before, and it feeds that thing of like, oh, you actually read what I wrote. And I've had people do that with me. I have an article that gets referenced all the time where I tell people they need to have their state name on their marketing. I get so frustrated when I see something come up and it's like such and such county. I was
Right.
like, I don't know where that is. And so I have this article, I talk about it in presentations, and I'll have people come up to me at conferences or they'll send me an email. It's like, hey, I read this article. We were talking about putting your state name on it. I love it. Hey, by the way, can you answer this question for me? And it is that like, oh, you're engaging with my stuff. You know me. So now we're further ahead in our relationship than we would be if it was a cold call.
Yeah, you're a little more motivated to answer that one right away because, oh,
Yeah.
they've interacted with me before. This isn't a strict cold call. Like there's that
Yeah.
relationship building.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and I know you kind of mentioned this earlier with the small business takeover for
Mhm.
Instagram, but I want to revisit that because I think that's a really cool tool that communities can do on like their tourism or their downtown account. That is kind of those two-prong approach. Like you said, use one tool and it has two different effects. That can help them drive customer traffic, but can also signal to other businesses that, hey, this downtown's going to support me, or this town's going to support me. I think that's just a really cool aspect of how to
Yeah.
use a tool that generates content. When from the city perspective, who's managing the account,
Mhm.
it's the easiest thing you can do is give it to someone else to do it for a day.
Exactly. Like it doesn't require you to do really anything. Um, and one thing we had talked about previously on a different call was that you don't have a list of potential entrepreneurs. You don't have a list of potential small business owners. If somebody is sitting at the kitchen table with their spouse and they're saying, hey, I think it'd be really cool if we opened up a pizza shop, you as the economic developer aren't like, hey, somebody out there wants to open a small business. You don't know that unless they reach out to you. So thinking about what can move them to the point of action. So if you are saying, hey, I'm using my social media platform to hype up my small businesses and showing that support, those people might be at home saying, hey, look, our town is really good at supporting small business. Maybe we should just reach out and like get the ball rolling on this. So that can be the thing to move the needle for somebody. But the small business or the Instagram takeovers and stuff like that, or even like a showcase thing, you can kind of spend the day with a local business. So showing here's what they do, here's who the owners are. Again, tying back to that relationship thing. Here's who the owners are. They're people in our community and we're here supporting them. And then retailers are looking at it and saying, okay, I see that they're supportive. I see what they're doing. That fits into what I'm looking for, and it can support that marketing message that you're putting together.
Yeah, I just think that's such a great idea, an easy tactic to kind of start with, like say on day one.
Yeah.
I know we also talked about email. That's something that you've
Mhm.
also had a lot of success with. What are some, I guess, tactics of email marketing? 'Cause I know that's something that we all receive, and we're on the
Mhm.
receiving it all the time. But actually conducting one or being on the messenger side of things,
Yeah.
probably a bigger hurdle for some of the community. So I guess, where do they start on that? What are some tips on the email sides of things?
Yeah. So email, when I'm talking about emailers, I'm not talking about a newsletter. So I'm not talking about something you send out once a week or once a month that just lists the stuff you've been doing. I'm talking about what's essentially a digital brochure. So I've got two examples where we kind of followed the same schedule, but we did completely different things with it. The first is with Electricities, North Carolina. It's their power provider. What we did for them was they were used to going to conferences and trade shows, and that was a thing obviously they weren't doing this year. So they reallocated that travel budget to digital marketing. So they were trying to sell available sites and buildings, and then also talk about their target industries that could do well in that building. So we had 4 emailers. Each one had an available site or building, and then talked about the assets related to a target industry that would do well there. So it's like, hey, we have this building that's available. It's in a part of the state that is really good with bioscience. Here's the assets we have related to bioscience. And then we distributed that to a massive list, but then also a small list of site location professionals and business owners in that bioscience industry. So we did that again with 4 properties, and there was one industry related to each of those. Another one we did was with the Northwest, I never say the name properly, the Northwest Georgia Joint Development Authority. Now, what we did with them was each emailer talked about 4 topics, but one was like the primary topic. So it was like, oh, we're going to talk in depth about this one thing and a little bit about these other 3. Then in the next emailer, one of the secondary topics became the primary. So we rotated through. So basically, over the course of all 4 emailers, each topic got to be the main topic once. And we talked about transportation connectivity, available sites and buildings, I believe education, and I think we did 2 target industries. I'm not sure, but it's been a couple of years since I did that one. But basically, again, tying back to who is my audience, what am I trying to accomplish, what are the assets I can market related to that, and then sending out that emailer. So the real key here is, again, it's not a newsletter. This is a well-written, well-designed email that goes to a targeted list of people talking about specific things related to them. Typically what we do is 4 emailers that we do 1 a quarter. You can do them more often than that, but I think that's where I would start. Because I think it's repetition, it's staying in front of people, but not to the point where you're annoying them.
Right. I think it's interesting that you kind of talk about how they're all separate, but they're linked in some way in
Mhm.
the 4 main titles. So if
Yeah,
someone maybe saw the 3rd or the 4th one and it piqued their interest and they saw some things below it that related to some other industries, it might
yeah.
jog the memory. It's like, oh, I've gotten emails before. Let me check my inbox. And oh, I have gotten some more things from
Mhm.
this. Looks familiar. And I think that kind of piece can ultimately build to, whenever the right time is to reach
Yep.
them, it's always on their time, right?
Yeah.
It matches up with what they're looking to do, and you never know when that is. But if you can have kind of that paper trail and that steady, visible but not annoying aspect
Yep.
of it, helps. Where I think it's a strong designation between a newsletter and something like that as a term of setting a
Also,
foundation.
the goal with an emailer is to drive traffic to your website. The emailer is not a standalone marketing piece. It is intended to push people to a website. I think when people build a website, they think, oh, I've got a website, I'm done now. But we call it cyber driftwood. If you're not telling people where it is, they're never going to find it. So you need to be using social media, using email, or using brochures, whatever, to drive people to the website. So when we were doing these emailers that were talking about sites and buildings, it's like, here's one site or building that we have available. We have others. Click here to see our other ones. Or with the target industry, it's like, this is one of many target industries we have. Click here to learn more about our other ones. And it's driving people to those pages of the website. Again, the pages we know that are important: sites and buildings, target industries, data, and workforce. So linking back to that, and then once they're in the website, they may kind of click around and look for other stuff that they wouldn't have seen if they hadn't gotten that emailer.
I think that's an important designation there. I don't know if I've heard it put that way, that the point of that email is to drive them to your website.
Yeah.
It's an introduction to get them to your website. And I guess from my experience going through emails and seeing this and kind of being disappointed that if you have an email blast about for a certain topic or
Mhm.
issue, and you don't have a page for it, or there's no corresponding aspect to your website, you're kind of lost and dead in the water there. Once you're I guess sent to their website, you make sure you have somewhere for them to land and find more information. So I guess
Yeah.
my thought is make sure if you are doing an email market piece that it does correspond to something you have ready for them to land on and find more information on your site, not just
Right.
get retail and have a site and then only have like one site, not have adjacent
Mhm.
pieces where there's not really enough time to, why did I come to this website? It's not actually going to help me like they said it would.
Yeah, and the problem that kind of causes is if you don't have a place for them to get more information, you then feel compelled to put all of that information in the email. And so it's like, okay, well, I need to talk about all of these things. So I'm going to write 18 paragraphs in an email and no one's going to read it. But
Right.
if you put one paragraph in and say, hey, you want to learn more about our workforce training and education, click here to go to our website to see that, then they can go and find it. You don't have to tell the whole story in the email or in the brochure or whatever it is that you're doing. It's the whole story's on the website and you're just trying to get people to go and read it.
Right. I think it's a good point. Well,
Yeah.
we're under about 10 minutes to go for an hour. We got a few questions pop in, so I want to get
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of jump in and talk about it. But first one coming through is talking about social media and I guess tactics. And you talked
Mhm.
about a lot of what to do. What are some mistakes? What are some things to maybe avoid? I think it's a good question of
Yeah.
what
I
are what should we not do on this?
I think the first biggest mistake I see for economic development social media is pairing it with the city or the county social media. So there's not its own freestanding thing. And we talked about how your audience is different. Your audience isn't local people. So your social media for your economic development organization is not where you're talking about road closures. It's not where you're talking about school delays because of the weather. This isn't where you're sharing, hey, sign up to enter your pie into the pie festival. That's not the economic development page. So I see a lot of communities focusing too much on an inward audience or a local audience on their economic development thing. So I think separating those two is really going to behoove you.
Yeah, we had
Um,
a joke talking about that before, where it's like you pull up your county website or your city website, and it's just road closures or schools canceled or
yeah,
day. Like that's all they see is on their feed is road closures. That's not something you want someone who's about to
no. And
community
it's like,
to
oh, I
know.
opened the
Roads are
economic development Twitter and it's like, hey, there's a water main burst. And it's like, well, that's not a good thing.
those aren't, yeah, exactly. Those aren't things you want your prospective investors to see. So
No.
I think it's really important to separate that out and have an economic development
Yeah.
separate from that. Because like I say, one's news and going on in the city to help your residents. One's
Yeah.
really, presenting yourself and what the real opportunity is.
Yeah, and I think the other real big issue I see is thinking that you are your audience. When we're talking about defining who your audience is, how old are they, what are they interested in, that might not always be you. So, you know, everybody talks about attracting millennials as talent. If you are sitting there and you are 50 and you're saying, well, I don't use Instagram or I don't think that we should do this. It's like, well, you're not your audience because you're trying to attract 25-year-olds whose interests are different than yours. And so the things that are important to you may not be important to your audience. And the things that are not important to you may be important to your audience. Um, I think about people when you ask them, like, oh, what is your community like? Like, oh, it's quiet, it's safe, it's a great place to raise a family. For some people, that's really interesting. For me, as a person who wants to live in a city and doesn't have kids, like, well, that just sounds boring. And so really asking yourself, who is my audience? What do they want? Even if it's not what I want, what do they want? And kind of getting out of your own kind of bias about what you think you should be doing.
Yeah, we harp on that a lot in our downtown workshops and working on the trade area sides of things. When you're talking to a site selector or a developer broker, and they say about your community, and you say, "Oh, it's a great place to live." I mean, that's good to know, but that's not what they care about first off. They want to know how many people are there. What's the disposable incomes? What are the core concepts that they look for
Yeah.
to make their investment work and ultimately pencil get a return on that. So I think
Yeah.
understanding who your audience is a big, I guess, mistake to avoid or not to misinterpret that, hey, this isn't for you and your friends. This is for your
Mhm.
ultimate audience, what you're trying to achieve. Back to our list of,
Yeah.
what our audience is. How does it relate back and make sure that your activities are relating to that?
Yeah. And I also think that I've experienced this with people I've worked with where it's like, well, I don't use Instagram. So I don't think we should market on Instagram. Or when we're talking about radio ads, like, well, I don't listen to the radio. It's like, well, yeah, you live 3 minutes from work. So no, you're not listening to the radio. But we know these people are driving 45 minutes to work and they are listening to the radio. So like you are not who we are marketing to. But we get that a lot where someone's like, well, I don't do that or I don't use that. It's like, okay, then don't see the ad. It's not for you anyway.
There you go.
Yeah.
We've got another question coming in, and it's asking about city websites.
Yeah.
Loading it up with demographics for potential retailers and developers. And I think what he's asking is, we talk about separating social media out.
Hmm.
Where should the economic development page be? Should it be tied into the city website? Should it be part of that? Should it be a tab? Should it be a whole different website? I guess what are the pros and cons of having them be separate? What are the pros and cons of having the city direct to them? I guess how should those two, I guess, websites that are standalone at some point work together?
In an ideal world, every economic development organization would have a freestanding website separate from the city or county. And that is because the audience is different and therefore the all of the messaging is different. So your city site is going to have a lot about, you know, trash pickup and utility providers and stuff like that specific to that audience. I really think everybody should have a freestanding site if they can. You can redirect to it from the county site, but I think if you can have your own site where you can have your own data, because you know what your audience is looking for, and your audience is different. So I think having your own site and catering that information and that data specific to that, because I think on your county site, when you're talking about data, there's a lot of pressure to not talk about other counties, to not talk about the region. It's like, well, this is our county site. We're just going to give the demographic information about our county. But we know, and we talked about this, that people are driving from other counties
Yeah,
to
businesses don't care
work.
about those artificial lines.
Yeah. And so you are doing yourself a disservice by only talking about your county. So if you pull out and have your own site where you can market your region and your regional assets and your regional data, I think it's going to benefit you a lot more. But I do think, and I know a question we get a lot with the data is, how much data should I have? I think my answer, honestly, is as much as you can afford. I think as much as you can get on there. I know that if you have like Location One or like Zoom Prospect or any of the things that you can get, like the sites and buildings widget, that comes with a data component that I don't think everybody realizes is on there. So if you have that, you already have the data component. So you can just put that on the website on the data page. I also know specific to like retail, I know Chmura has like a retail data piece where it kind of gives some of their demographic information specific to retail attraction. And there are others that do stuff like that. I know GIS Web Tech has something similar. So there's lots of things that you can do. So really, as much data as you can afford is what you should have on there. But I understand like it's expensive. It can get really expensive. So I think a bare minimum is going to be your labor shed and educational attainment and kind of your industries.
Yeah, I think it's a good extension. It's like you said, to have it be separate, but you can still link it from your city website. So if they do end up going through that aspect, they can still easily find it and get sent over to where they can get all their information at once.
Yeah.
It's 11 o'clock, but I got one question just popped in that I think is
Yeah.
kind of important. Talking about the life cycle of an ED website,
Mhm.
branding wise, how long do those brands last? How long do they need to refresh their site? I guess, how long or how often do they need to, I guess, freshen up their image in terms of an economic website or an agency?
Yeah, I think our general rule is that a website lifespan is about 3 years. Um, and that's not based on content, that's just based on technological advancement. Websites that we built 3 years ago don't function as well as websites that we're building this year because things have just progressed. Um, I think this is a question I get a lot is how often should I like change out the photography on my website? People are not looking at your website as often as you are. So it's hard sometimes where it's like, oh, this photo has been up here for 6 months. It's like, yeah, well, you look at your website once a week. I don't. I'm going to look at your website once, maybe twice. So it doesn't matter to me that the photos don't change. The real key is the content, making sure that if you if you get a new program in your school, it's like, oh, we've added a new like welding program, or transportation, or like warehousing and logistics is a target industry. We just added a diesel mechanic program to our community college. That needs to go on the website the day that that becomes public information. Like slap that up there, start talking about it. You need to make sure if you're managing your data yourself, you need to make sure the data is current, make sure your sites and buildings are current. So really, as far as website maintenance, it's just making sure that new things get added as they come up and old things get removed as they go away. But I don't think you don't need to be making changes to the design and the photography on a website frequently. That's not really something that you're going to prioritize a thing. That's not what I would prioritize.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where understanding your audience is only going to be there a few times, over
Yeah.
the course of a few years helps you rather than putting more work like we've talked on
Yeah.
the rest of the previous hour or so.
Oh, exactly. And there is some equity in maintaining a consistent design aesthetic. So if you are putting out things on social media and you're using a graphic that has a design aesthetic to it, keeping that consistent helps. So now when you post something, and we're talking about repetition, people are going to recognize it immediately because it's like, oh, I've seen other posts from this person that have this graphic. So you have that visual equity that you don't want to waste by constantly freshening and changing your design.
Yeah, because if you're changing too much and you have a developer or an investor looking at your area for a project, and then 18 months from now, a different project, and you've gone from red to blue or
Yeah.
green or yellow, he's going to think twice that this is the same area. It's going to be just kind of a hesitation piece. So I think that consistency is important.
Yeah,
Well, somehow we've gone over an hour. I guess we can talk about this all day.
we could.
But we're going to wrap it up there. We've got a
Okay.
few questions that we'll try to get to via email and follow-ups. But if you have any questions, like I said, we'll be sending this recording out to all the registrants along with Colleen and both of our contact information. So feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And Colleen, is there, I guess, final words to wrap up everything today?
I mean, I just appreciate you guys having me on here. And I'm excited if you have questions or if you just want to run an idea by me, feel free to reach out. I'm always excited to talk to people. Economic development is something that is really important to us. We like seeing communities grow and we like being part of that growth. So I'm glad we were able to partner on this. I think this was great.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and lead up to it, like I said, we spent several hours just kind of talking through some of this stuff, and we found ourselves down some rabbit holes just kind of talking.
Yep. We had to whittle down to get to what we did talk about.
Sure. So being under an hour really surprised me that we could even do it.
Yeah.
We're obviously so passionate about that, helping small
Yeah.
communities and communities of all sizes kind of help reach their goals. So if there's anything either one of us can do, feel free to reach out and to check your inbox here shortly for the recording and all of our contact information. And thanks for tuning in.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.